Hi, in this particular recording, I was asked to show how I create the image flyers that I use on Instagram. Simply, they look something like this. Um, I just have a photograph, I have some text on the image, and I added a hyperlink, even though the link really isn't active because on Instagram the links aren't active, only in your profile. So I'm going to walk through the simple steps that I use just to create this simple flyer. It's that I can use in Instagram, and it also appears on my Facebook page. Okay, so let's go to Photoshop. This is where the image began. It began as a regular image. I took this photo maybe about 4 or 5 years ago on a different photo walk, but it's the same location that I'm going to be using for the current photo walk that we're going to have for this year. I had my watermark on there, so I'm going to turn my watermark off. The first thing I decided to do was to crop the image, and when I select the crop tool, I make sure that the ratio is set. If you're familiar with Photoshop, you know all your controls for all your tools appear up in this top menu. So when I select the crop tool, these are the options I'm presented with. So I selected the square option. So the image is going to be square because Instagram images are already square. I'm going to crop the image, and I still cropped it kind of using the rule of thirds just so that it's still aesthetically pleasing. And we have the young lady. I didn't really want to get those people in the background there, so I just shifted it over a little bit. Once I decide where I want to crop it, I just hit delete. Actually return, sorry. I hit the return button, and then this is what I'm presented with. Now, I decide to change the name of this image because I do not want to overwrite the original image. So I go in, save as, and I just decided to save it as square. You can type out the whole word, or I just did SQ so that I know that it's square. And it's a Photoshop file because it's going to have layers. So I save it as a Photoshop file. The layers are selected there. I'm going to embed it with this color profile. sRGB is the best color profile to save images when you want to use them online. And this is going to be used online. It's not going to be printed. It's strictly for online. So I save. Okay, so now the next thing is my text. I select the text tool, and the text on here is going to be white. Now I don't really need this particular layer because this is the layer that had my watermark on it, so really I can trash that so I'm not confused with anything. Now I have selected my text tool, and I go up, and the color I'm going to use is white because mainly I am just going to put my text in this darkened area here because it will be more legible. I select white for the color that I'm going to use, and I said OK. Now I select the font. Depending on what fonts you have loaded on your computer, you select the font you want to use. My suggestion is to use a font or typeface that's legible. Don't use a script font because the eye takes a little more time to recognize the letter forms and to read it. On Instagram, people need to see things quickly. On Facebook also, they need to see things quickly. You don't want people to have to stop to try and interpret what it is that you're trying to say to them. So use a font that's clean, that's neat. So I use a typeface like Gotham. You can choose Arial or Helvetica or Futura or anything you prefer, but my suggestion is to stay away from a script font unless what you're doing really calls for a script font. So now I have Gotham, and I decided to make it bold. And in my Gotham selection, I'm going to use Gotham Black. Now the text that I'm going to use on this, I've already typed out, and it's on a text file, just a plain text file. I'm using a Mac computer, and so we have plain text files where I type up everything that I want, so I can just cut and paste. If you're on a PC, you might want to, I think you have something called Notepad. It's the same thing. It's non-formatted text, and you can just cut and paste. So I'm just going to go ahead, copy this, and I'm going to go to my image now. Now that I have the type tool selected, and I have it set at center, but I'm going to change it to flush left so that it aligns on the left. I click my cursor right here in the image, and then I paste my text. So my text is now pasted in my image. You see it created a new layer, and you'll notice that once you hit the return key, this layer now is named with the text that you just used. I go up to the top of my screen and I select the move tool, and this way I can move my text around and position it the way I want it. Now there's a little bit too much line space in between my lines, so now I'm going to correct it. I select my text tool again, I highlight my text. Now you have to be careful, because if you don't select this layer here, select your text tool, and if you click on it by mistake, you will end up creating a new layer, and you'll wonder why I can't select my text. So that means you have created a new layer. You don't want to create a new layer, so you want to be sure you select that particular layer that you're working in, you select your text tool, and you very gently highlight the text you're working on. So now I'm going to increase the point size. It's at 20.5, so let's make it 30 or 24, or you can go in and type the number if you want to be a little more precise, and there it's 28. Alright, so now I have it set at 28. I get my move tool, and I can move my text around. I'm going to move it up a little bit because I'm going to put the URL to the website where the information is located. So now here we have our text. It's set, and I decided, well, I'm going to make it stand out a little bit more, so I'm going to add a drop shadow. And all I did was I select this layer again where the text is, and at the bottom here where you see the FX stands for effects. When I click on it, I can go through here and select drop shadow. So now my drop shadow is there. I have it set on preview so that I can preview the drop shadow as I add it. Now this is already set from a previous time when I used it. The drop shadow blend mode is set at multiply. Multiply means that that's usually the best mode that we use for shadows, because it adds a blending effect, or almost transparency kind of effect to what's underneath it. So you want that to show through on your when you use a drop shadow. You don't want your drop shadow to be solid, because in reality shadows are not necessarily that dark. Sometimes they are, but a drop shadow underneath something, it looks a little more realistic, like this. Alright, so it's set at 75. You can play around with it and change it the way you want. The angle of my shadow, universally I usually use something called like 120, and you'll see this changes the angle of the shadow. That means the light is going to be coming from the upper right hand corner, and the upper left hand corner. That's the angle where my light is coming from. So then my shadow is going to be, as you can see here in the preview, on the lower right hand part. So the light is coming from the top here and the shadow is going down there. All right, so you can create 75% is good because this is all dark, so this is good. Distance 10 pixels. I don't need to change the spread. The size is 40. That's fine. Also, you can change the size of it. 40 is kind of good, and I will leave it there, and I will say OK. So now I have created a drop shadow. Now if I move this into a lighter area, you can see how my drop shadow is. It's not too dark. It just creates just a little bit of emphasis so that it stands out here. Now the next thing I want to do is add in my URL at the bottom. So I go back to my text pad. I copy that. I go back to my layer with my text tool. Now this one is going to be set to align on the right hand side. So I'm going to change my alignment to right hand, and I'm going to click here in the window of my photo. You see it creates a new layer, and then I paste it, and it pastes it in the URL. I'm just going to move this around, position it where I want to. I don't want it to be as bold, so I select this, select my text, and I click on it and highlight it, and I'm going to change the font to a Gotham that is not black. I'm just going to use book, which is regular. Looks a little different there. And I'm also going to change the point size to be smaller. Instead of it being 28, I'm going to go down to like 18. That's a little small. So let's go back up a little bit. 24. How do I like that? Okay, 24 is good. Now I'm going to put a drop shadow underneath this also. Instead of going in and adding the drop shadow the same way I did before, I want the drop shadow to match this. So all I need to do is I'm going to select this layer, and I'm holding down the hold down the control key. I'm on a Mac, so I can only tell you the keys that I'm using. Here, control and clicked, and then I scroll down and I do a copy layer style. So it copies the layer style, which is this drop shadow, and then I select this, hold down the shift key, and I get that sub menu, and I'm going to paste that layer style. Now if you're on a PC or you don't really know the shortcuts, the other way you can do it also is when you highlight this layer, you can go up to layer and you scroll down to layer styles, and you'll see copy and paste here. So for those of you who are on PC, just go up to layer up in your upper menu and scroll down to layer style, and then scroll to copy layer style and paste, and do those subsequently the same. So now I have my image. Now understand, these links, it's no HTML involved. These links aren't active, but people will have to type this in. Now what I did was create a short link to make it easier to type in, because if a person types in bit.ly/photoday 2015 NJ, it will take them to my website. So now I have this. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. It's exactly the way I want it. So now the only thing I need to do now is just save it to be used online. And I can go here where it says File. I scroll down to Export. Now with the new Photoshop, I'm using Photoshop CC, 2015. So I have the latest version of Creative Cloud Photoshop. And they changed it slightly. So now I'm going to export this. I can do export as, but now I have this set with save for web. Now this will now save this file to be used on the web, even though it's in layers as a Photoshop file. I have this, you go and you select here the type of file you want. I like to use a high JPEG, and I changed the quality to 80. You can leave it at 60, but I like my quality just a little higher, so I save it to 80, so it's very high. These settings, optimized, convert to sRGB, this is always set, so if perchance your file isn't already an sRGB file, this will export it as an sRGB file. Hopefully it saves my metadata with my copyright information already inside. Now the image size in pixels in web usage, this is huge. So I use a size that's something like 1800. 1800 gives you a nice, clear, crisp, high-res looking file when it is used on Instagram and then when it's shared to Facebook and Twitter. So it's a square. So of course I have the chain locked here so that my dimensions are locked together, so that my height and my width change simultaneously, and I maintain my proportions correctly. And then I just say save. It takes you to wherever you want to save it, and I had a folder that I already created for this project, and I named this file, I added the SQ onto it when it was a Photoshop file. Now it's saving as a JPEG file, and it's saving in this folder that I've already had all my other items set up, and this is actually the folder where the original file came from, so I'm saving. Okay, now okay, here we go. It's on my drive. Sorry about that. So now I scroll down to the file that I just saved. Here it is right here. This is the file. If I open it up in Photoshop, we can take a look at it. And this is the file. The file size has been converted to 1800 pixels by 72. It's kind of big, but I want it to have a pretty large size so that it maintains a good resolution for me to use on Instagram. So let's go back. Now the thing that I do now is, how do I get it on Instagram? Because Instagram is for your phones. It works on your phone. It's an app that works on your phone, not on your desktop. So I always add the files to a Dropbox folder. I have Dropbox, and I have Dropbox installed on my computer. I have a Dropbox account, and I have the app installed on my desktop. So I just bring that up, and I go to folder, and it brings up my Dropbox folder. Everything that's here in this folder on my desktop is also in the cloud version of Dropbox. So I have a folder on Dropbox that I call Instagram, and I install and drop all my Instagram images there. So now I'm just going to take this image that I just created, drop it in this folder, and there it goes. So it's there. It also backs up to my Flickr account. So I save my images in various places so that I don't lose them. So it's always good to have your images saved. So in any case, now it's in my Dropbox folder and it's there. So it's just a matter of updating it and letting it refresh. So when I go to my my cell phone now, I have Dropbox installed on my cell phone. So I go to that app, I refresh the app, and I navigate my way to find that image in that Dropbox in that Instagram folder. And that's how I bring it up to Instagram. Okay, so hopefully this was very helpful. And until next time, this is Mary B.